I'm Kenny Harmon, also known as Sad Papaw, and we are in my home in Dibble, Oklahoma. And if I was going to start thinking of memories as a child, I guess I'd start with one of my earliest memories of when I scared myself about half to death on a creek not far from here when I stepped on a water snake and the snake bit one of my toes. I thought it was a water moccasin. My mother knew better. I was throwing a fit because she wouldn't take me to the doctor. I thought I was going to die. But I've got many, many memories of being raised here on Grandpa and Grandma's homestead. It depends on what time of year it is. If it's the summertime, springtime, I've got quite a bit more to do with my trees and my lawn. And I like to research online for stories about history. If I see something interesting, I'll take a screenshot just in case I need to put it in a book. That's happened several times. I've found interesting stories online and took some good photos, screenshots, and they wound up in some of my books. Well, I've enjoyed reading about things that I enjoyed, like World War II and a lot of sports. And I was a straight A student in school, but as far as writing, being an author, that never occurred to me until someone asked me about writing a book after the Sad Papaw story. Well, as I said, someone mentioned to me about writing a book after the Sad Papaw story went viral. And the first thing I thought of was my ancestors, especially my grandpa and my great-grandfather. I got in contact with a few of my cousins, and they were more than glad to help me. I've got one cousin that's the guru of genealogy for our family, and she helped a lot, and she was the one that gave me this story, which wound up in the book. And I'm going to, when we get time or get to it, I'm going to read a couple of things from this. But that's how it all got started. My ex-wife has told me more than once that I should put my story in a book about my ironworking career. Now there was a lot of things happened to me because I worked in 27 different states. I did a lot of traveling. I was on a job where 3 ironworkers got killed. I've seen a lot of things in my traveling. But as far as actually affecting my writing, that didn't have anything to do with that. Well, that was something that one of my cousins got into. My sister had a book that someone wrote years and years ago about 4 or 5 different families, and our family was one of them. And those families were from Kentucky. So that was kind of where we started. And then from there, in my own research, I went all the way back and found the origins of our surname. Many, many years ago, our name was not Harmon, it was Hermann. We were German, and that was our names when my ancestors came to America in the 1700s. Well, it was easy to connect with the history that we found when my great-great-grandfather was raising his family in Kentucky, because back then there were no tractors. And I could relate to that because of stories my dad told me about my grandpa. All the farming that Grandpa did until the late 1930s was done with mules. His first tractor, I believe he purchased in either 37 or 38. So it was easy for me to relate to what went on in Kentucky 100 years before Grandpa was doing his thing in Oklahoma, because of the stories that my dad told me about Grandpa. My grandpa was a big baseball fan. He had a brother that was a big baseball fan. That was passed on to my dad, and then from those three, it was passed on to me. My favorite story is Grandpa seeing Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig play baseball in Oklahoma City in 1927. And that was the year that Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs. So I guess that's got to be my favorite memory about baseball and Grandpa and my dad. When my ancestors left Kentucky, they first came to Kansas, Missouri, and before they came to Oklahoma. But during that 30 to 40 years, when they finally settled in Oklahoma, those were some of the things that were going on. The graham crackers and so on and so forth. Those were just things that were found during the research of what was going on, inventions during that time. I first learned about that rosebush from Uncle Kenneth Swinney. That's the man I was named after. He told me that he remembered that rosebush in 1925. He said that Grandma planted that rosebush in the early 1920s. So that rosebush went through the Dust Bowl. Very hardy plant. Part of that rosebush is in my front yard. I took roots from that rosebush about 7-8 years ago, and I planted 10 roots out here in my front yard, and that rosebush has just done amazing how big it's grown in just several years. Well, that oil well was very significant because Grandpa first started thinking about having an oil well on his land. He and Grandma had over 300 acres. And when the oil boom came to Oklahoma City, he began thinking about having an oil well on his land. So there was years went by, and finally in 1966, I was 16, Grandpa was contacted by an oil company. They told him they were going to drill. But the happiness didn't last all that long because the oil well was drilled, but the stimulation process failed. So it was reported as a dry hole. And I know that hurt Grandpa because he'd been looking forward to that well for so long. But also the significance of that well, that was the first time I ever received a paycheck. One of the companies that was working at the well site hired me as a night watchman. So 16 years old, I was sleeping in the back of my car. I think it was close to a week. And when the job was over, I got my first paycheck. Grandpa passed away in 1969. The company came back in 1974 and attempted again to stimulate the well, and their second attempt was successful. And they brought the well in, and that well is still producing. Not much, but it's still producing 50 years later. Well, I never heard Daddy talk much about things like that. I know that he lived through, and Mother also. I know they lived through the years of polio, and I remember the vaccines when I was a child for measles and smallpox. But I didn't hear too many stories of what was going on. We'll do that right now. The most famous Harmon before me was named Heinrich Henry Harmon. In 1752, at the age of 26, Henry was appointed constable of the New River area. This is in Virginia. A captain of troops of horse, and an overseer of the road. Henry Harmon was described by a contemporary as very tall, of massive frame, and very strongly built. And I'll give an example of his physical strength. He was attacked by Indians. His horse was shot out from under him. The horse landed on one of his legs, and with his leg that was free, he pushed the horse off of his leg that was trapped and managed to escape. He had such a great reputation that the Indians gave him a nickname, and the nickname meant great warrior. He was quite a man. The easiest way for me to write is to write about things that I was interested growing up. I think I mentioned World War II earlier, and there were sports. In 1958, that was a monumental year for me. I was only 8 years old when sports started to click, and when I fell in love with baseball. Well, that was such a shock. I got a phone call from Ryan Seacrest's radio program. I got a phone call from CBS. The first phone call I got was from Inside Edition. And they were the main media outlet that was at the big cookout. I guess the cookout kind of made me realize how big a story it was. We were hoping for 500, and there was close to 2,000 showed up. I think there were 28 different states. So after that day, it kind of, I began to realize how big a story it was. Grandpa bought the windmill, which has been moved. It's been moved about a half a mile. I wanted to preserve it, so it's been moved to my land. One of the things I hope people can get from heritage is early America and how difficult life was to put food on the table just to survive. And that went on for over 200 years before, you started getting automobiles, and, they got to the Industrial Revolution. They had tough times, and even after they started having cars and tractors and all that, it was still tough times because the Great Depression came in 1929, or started. And then for this area, the Dust Bowl started in 1931. So this area had to deal with the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And I would hope that young kids would think about those things. And when they think they've got it tough, they better think again. See, I haven't written anything about my adult life and like my ironworking career, and what I would do would be to write a book that was mostly about me, my ironworking career, and the things that I've seen and the things that I've done.